Hello Tool Kids, this is Greg Myers at Tools4Teens. Today we're going to talk about vices and clamps because you have to be able to hold things still before you can work on them. Well, whenever you're talking about putting two things together and holding them still, you might be talking about clamping something. And there's all sorts of clamps, and the little ones are just called clamps, and the big ones are called vices. So the simplest kind of form is something that's sort of like a clothespin. It's just something that has some kind of spring in it that holds two pieces together. So let's take this one and we're just going to put it right on there, and you can see that's going to hold two things together real well. So let's get a little bigger one. Okay, here's a bigger one. This takes a little more. I use something like that for welding, and you can put two pieces of steel together and hold them in place while you're welding so they don't move, which is very important that when you're working on something that it doesn't move. Okay, well then there's these things called vice grips. Okay, and what they are is they're a fancy kind of a pliers with a compound type of fulcrum in here, compound type of a lever in here that gets things very, very tight. And you adjust it right back here, and you let it loose right here. That opens it up, okay? And this might be used when you want to grasp something and hold it in your hand while you're working. Otherwise, it's another way that you could clamp something to a work table like that. If you look on this, remember we looked at pliers before, this has different sorts of grooves in it so that you can hold different kinds of things real securely. And then there's C-clamps, vice grips, C-clamps that are specialized for doing different jobs. Okay, holding things down a certain way. That's a special way for a specific job. And we've got them that have a wide C-clamp jaw on them. For instance, when you're doing body work or something like that where you need to get way around something before you can clamp it. And then there's needle nose ones, so you can clamp things that are very close in. Here are some more clamps, and these are also like vice grips, but they're made specially to clamp on to a drill press like we've seen to drill holes, and they'll hold something very still. See, these things press down against the workpiece, and then you can adjust them, okay, to go up and down. And see that? You bring it down again and then squeeze, and that thing is not going anywhere. Well, we've talked before about the simple machine and the screw that's in a simple machine, and this is another way of clamping things, and they come in various sizes and shapes. Now here's a little guy that you tighten it up here, okay, you tighten it up here, and what that does is it clamps these two little tiny jaws together. Okay, all right, that's just a little guy there. The key word to remember today is clamp. Well, here's an example of a wood clamp, and this wood clamp might be used just to hold a couple pieces together while you're screwing things through them or drilling, or maybe if you're laminating, which is where you actually take and glue pieces together and then you squeeze it here to get it nice and tight. Well, here's another type of clamp that we use on woodwork, and this is called a pipe clamp, and you put it on your work and you slide that up there, and then you can tighten it by using this screw mechanism here, and that'll hold things. Sometimes you want to hold something that's really big, really long, like a rocking chair that you need to fix, or something like that. So maybe you need something that goes a long distance. Well, here's another type of woodworking clamp, and this one bolts on the edge of a table, and it has soft jaws in it, and you can actually put your wood in and work off the edge of the table here. Tighten it up there. But as you can see, you can do an awful lot of different positioning with one of these types of woodworking vices. Sometimes when you're doing modeling, you need little tiny alligator clips to hold things close to one another. In this case, you might use this for soldering something, okay? And sometimes you just want a little tiny way of holding things on, a little tiny. This is your first look at a vise, and a vise like this can also contain a little tiny anvil, which is a place to hit things, to flatten them out, or actually to bend them when you have this round thing at the end here. So here is a little tiny modeler's vise. Here's another one, okay? And this one has a big suction cup on the bottom, so you can put it on a surface, tighten up the suction cup, and it's not going to move anywhere. I've had this for 40 or 50 years, this little guy here. Okay. Anyhow, it still serves me well. But now we get to the big guy, okay? This is a full-size vise, and it's bolted to a bench. It's called a bench vise. And it also has these big jaws, and you measure vices by how far it is from one side of the jaw to the other. That's how you specify the size of the vise. So it has this screw inside of it to make it go open and shut. It's got an anvil on it. They almost all have some kind of anvil to pound on. And then if you look here, what you'll see are the jaws have a texture to them, okay, like a sort of a cross-hatching type texture. And then way down here you'll see something else, and this is for holding pipe. Okay, you can hold pipe real still with that. Sometimes that little piece in the vise that turns comes in handy. See, the base might be fixed, but maybe you have to get at something at some kind of an angle. So you have something in the base of the vise that turns. Or sometimes what you have to have is something that allows you to get the jaws at an angle, and you can adjust those jaws right in there. Here's another example of an adjustable vise. Okay, you can turn that at any different angles, and this one has a couple of interesting features. Right here, if you want to protect your work, then you want to put these little inserts in between your jaws to protect it, and these happen to be made out of copper, and that's a softer metal, so that will protect whatever you're working on. And then there's another thing on this particular vise here. Let's keep going here. You can turn this so it has two sets of different kinds of jaws, which is really handy. This particular type of vise isn't quite as strong because of that as a regular blacksmithing type vise like this guy here. A vise like this, you shouldn't be afraid of taking a piece of metal and putting it in there and just giving it a good whack, I couldn't do this video without showing one of my best friends. This is my great big monster desk vise or shop vise I've had for 40 years at least. They never go bad. Okay, you'd have to really run over it with a tank or something for anything to happen to one of these guys. You can trust it. It's your home base. And one of my suggestions is if you're going to work on things, you should get yourself some kind of a vise. Now, when you're using a milling machine, or if you're using some other big machine tools, you need to have a really big vise to hold things still. And here is a vise that is a quick set vise. This vise is usually bolted to a milling machine, and by lifting this knob up, you can make these jaws go in and out really easily. Okay, and then when you get it clamped on wherever you want it, then you push down on this knob and it stays right there. Sometimes you have to be even more precise, and that means you need a bigger vise yet. Now this is just a big machine vise that you would bolt onto a milling machine, okay, that holds things extremely tightly and extremely still. And you adjust it over here with this screw. Here's an example of a clamp that's part of a machine, and this is what you call a wood saw, radial wood saw, circular saw, okay, or a power miter box. And you need to hold your work very still when you're doing that because you're cutting very precise angles. Here's another example of a vise that's part of another machine, and you can adjust that vise to different sizes to hold a piece of work, okay? And this is on a metal cutting chop saw. Sometimes your vise has to rotate, like on this lathe that's spinning that round piece around in circles. And this vise is adjusted. All three jaws are adjusted by taking this key and turning it in and out to get that to loosen up so you can take out the workpiece. But it's still a vise. Here, look at that. It's still a vise. Those pieces that are like little tiny vices that rotate with something round in them, those are called chucks, and you adjust them with a key. Okay, here's a key, and this will loosen up and this will fall right out of here. Well, tool kids, this is what I wanted to show you about clamps and vices. And after you get your tools collected together and you're going to work on things, then see if you can find a workbench that you can clamp a vise to. That'll be your home base. Well, that's all I've got today on Tools for Teens. I'll see you next time.